The night Selene Ardis grabbed a stranger to escape her fate, she didn't know she'd just touched the one man in the kingdom no one dared to reach, the cursed Alpha King himself. What happened next shattered a century of silence, ignited a bond that should never have existed, and set in motion a chain of events that would either save them both or destroy everything. If you want to see how a desperate decision in a ballroom full of wolves became the beginning of a war no one saw coming, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels tonight. The music was too loud, the chandeliers too bright, and Selene Ardis was suffocating. She stood near the marble columns at the edge of the grand ballroom, her fingers gripping the stem of a crystal glass she hadn't taken a single sip from. Around her, the mating ball churned with forced elegance. Alphas in tailored black suits, omegas and betas draped in silk and jewels, all pretending this wasn't a glorified auction house where bloodlines were bartered and futures were signed away with a smile. Selene hated every second of it. She hated the perfume that choked the air. She hated the way eyes slid over her like she was livestock being appraised. She hated the fact that she was here at all, dressed in a gown her mother had chosen, pale gold, strapless, cut to show just enough to be appealing without being improper. But most of all, she hated that she couldn't leave. Not yet. Not until her father's political games were finished. Her family, House Ardis, was minor nobility at best, clinging to relevance through calculated marriages and whispered alliances. Her father had made it clear weeks ago. Tonight, she would be introduced to Lord Davin Hale, a high-ranking beta from the northern provinces. The match had already been arranged. All that remained was the performance. Selene's role was simple: smile, nod, and seal the deal. She'd done everything right up until 2 hours ago. That was when she'd walked into the powder room and found her fiancé, Davin, with his hand up her cousin Lyra's dress, his mouth on her neck, her breathless laughter echoing off the marble walls. They hadn't even noticed her. Selene had turned and walked out without a word. No scene, no tears, just a cold, hollow ache spreading through her chest like frost. She hadn't told anyone. What would be the point? Her father would blame her for not keeping him interested. Her mother would say it was a misunderstanding. Lyra would bat her lashes and apologize in that sing-song voice that made Selene want to scream. And Davin? Davin would marry her anyway, because that was the arrangement. So here she was, standing at the edge of the ballroom, trying to figure out how much longer she had to endure this before she could slip away unnoticed. The answer came faster than she expected. Selene. She flinched at the sound of her father's voice. He appeared beside her, all tight smiles and iron eyes, his hand landing on her elbow like a shackle. "Lord Hale is waiting," he said quietly. "Stop sulking and go greet him properly." Her stomach twisted. "I'm not sulking." "Then stop looking like you're attending a funeral." His grip tightened, just enough to hurt. "This is your future, Selene. Act like you're grateful for it." She wanted to laugh. Grateful. For a man who couldn't keep his hands off her cousin 2 hours before their engagement was supposed to be finalized. But she didn't say that. Instead, she nodded, smiled. Let her father steer her toward the center of the ballroom where Davin stood in a circle of minor lords, his expression smug and relaxed, as if nothing had happened, as if she didn't know. He saw her coming and grinned. "There she is." Selene's skin crawled. Her father released her elbow and stepped back, leaving her standing in front of Davin like a prize being presented. Davin's gaze traveled over her slowly, lingering in places that made her want to slap him. "You look beautiful tonight, Selene." She forced a smile. "Thank you. Though I was starting to think you were avoiding me." "Not at all." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Good. Because I've been looking forward to this all evening." She could smell Lyra's perfume on him. Her hands curled into fists at her sides, nails biting into her palms. She couldn't do this. Not tonight. Not ever. Before she could think of an excuse to leave, the ballroom doors at the far end of the hall opened, and the entire room went silent. It wasn't a gradual hush. It was instant, absolute. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every head turned. Selene felt the shift in the air before she understood what caused it. A pressure, sharp and suffocating, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. And then she saw him. He stood in the doorway, tall and still, dressed in black from collar to boots. No decoration, no jewelry, just raw, unignorable presence. She didn't need to be told who he was. Everyone knew. Kadrin Voss, the Alpha King. Selene had never seen him in person before. Royalty didn't mix with minor houses like hers, but she'd heard the stories. Everyone had. He was the king who never attended court functions, the Alpha who ruled from the shadows, the man whose bloodline carried a curse so old, so brutal, that his ancestors had waged wars just to keep it hidden. And now he was here. Why? No one moved. No one spoke. Kadrin's gaze swept across the ballroom slowly, and Selene felt the temperature drop. His eyes were dark, too dark, and there was something wrong about the way he stood, like he was holding himself together by sheer will alone. She couldn't look away, neither could anyone else. And then his gaze landed on her, just for a second, but it was enough to make her breath catch. His expression didn't change. He didn't acknowledge her, but she felt it, a pull, sharp and inexplicable, like a thread yanked tight between them. Then he looked away, and the moment shattered. The ballroom exhaled. Conversations resumed in hurried whispers. The orchestra, which had stopped playing entirely, picked up a waltz again. But Selene's heart was still racing. "Who invited him?" Davin muttered, his voice tight with unease. Her father appeared at her side again, his face pale. "This is unusual." Unusual was an understatement. The Alpha King hadn't attended a public event in over 3 years. The last time he had, someone had died. Selene watched as Kadrin moved through the crowd with deliberate slowness. People parted for him without being asked. No one approached. No one dared. He stopped near the center of the ballroom, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid. And then he did something no one expected. He looked directly at her father. Her father stiffened. "Excuse me," he said quickly, and hurried toward the king. Selene stood frozen, watching as her father bowed low, his voice too quiet to hear over the music. Kadrin said something in return, short, clipped, and her father's face went white. Then the king turned and walked straight toward her. Selene's pulse hammered in her ears. No, this couldn't be happening. But he kept coming, his gaze locked on hers, and the crowd parted around him like water. Davin stepped in front of her protectively. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice tight. "This is—" Kadrin didn't even glance at him. "Move." It wasn't loud. It wasn't a threat. But Davin moved, and then Kadrin was standing in front of her, close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jaw, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. The music swelled around them. And then, in a voice so low only she could hear, he said, "Dance with me." It wasn't a question. It was a command. Selene's mind went blank. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. His hand extended toward her, palm up, waiting. She could feel the entire ballroom watching, feel her father's horror, feel Davin's fury. But none of that mattered. Because the moment Kadrin's eyes met hers again, something inside her snapped. A thread she didn't know existed, pulled so tight it burned. She didn't think. She just moved. Her hand slipped into his, and the world caught fire. The second their skin touched, Kadrin's entire body went rigid. Selene gasped. It wasn't pain, it was something else entirely. A jolt, electric and overwhelming, that raced up her arm and straight into her chest. Her vision blurred for half a second, and she swore she felt his heartbeat sinking with hers. Kadrin's grip tightened, his jaw clenching so hard she heard his teeth grind. Around them, the ballroom seemed to tilt. Someone dropped a glass. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot. The music faltered. Kadrin didn't move, didn't breathe. And then slowly, he pulled her onto the floor. Selene's legs moved on instinct, following the rhythm of the waltz, even though her mind was screaming at her to run. His hand settled on her waist, firm, controlled, and she felt the heat of it even through the fabric of her gown. They moved in silence. 1 step, 2. Her pulse was so loud she could barely hear the music. "Why did you do that?" she whispered. Kadrin's gaze stayed fixed over her shoulder. "You tell me." She blinked. I don't understand." "Neither do I." His voice was rough, strained, like every word cost him something. Selene risked a glance up at his face and immediately regretted it. His eyes were no longer dark. They were burning. Not metaphorically, literally. A faint amber glow flickered at the edges of his irises, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. She knew what that meant. Everyone did. The curse. Selene's breath hitched. Don't. His grip on her waist tightened, almost painful. Don't say it. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Then let me go. I can't. Why not? His jaw worked. His gaze finally dropped to hers, and the intensity in it made her knees weak. Because the second I do, he said quietly, I'm going to lose control. Fear shot through her, but it wasn't the kind she expected. It wasn't fear of him. It was fear of what would happen if he did let go. The song ended. Applause rippled through the ballroom, polite and uncertain. Kadrin released her so abruptly she stumbled. He took a step back, his hands curling into fists at his sides, his breathing uneven. For a moment she thought he might say something, but he didn't. He turned and walked away, cutting through the crowd without a word, leaving a wake of stunned silence behind him. Selene stood there, alone in the center of the ballroom, her heart still racing, her skin still tingling where he'd touched her. And she knew, whatever had just happened, it wasn't over. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Her father dragged her into a side corridor the moment Kadrin disappeared, his face twisted with barely restrained fury. What did you do? He hissed. Selene shook her head, still dazed. Nothing. I didn't. You danced with him. He asked. He commanded. And you obeyed. Her father's hands shook. Do you have any idea what you've just done? She didn't. But judging by the way everyone had stared at her for the rest of the evening, it was something catastrophic. Davin had refused to speak to her. Lyra had smirked from across the room. And her mother had looked at her like she was a stranger. By the time the ball ended, Selene felt hollowed out, her nerves frayed to nothing. She returned home in silence, locked herself in her room, and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her hands. She could still feel it. The heat, the pull, the way his voice had cracked when he said, I can't. She didn't sleep. And when dawn broke, a royal summons arrived at her door. Selene stared at the envelope, her name written in sharp, elegant script across the front. Her mother stood in the doorway, pale and trembling. What does it say? Selene broke the seal with shaking hands and unfolded the letter. It was short, direct. Miss Ardis, you are hereby requested to present yourself at the royal fortress within 3 days' time. Your services as a piano tutor have been retained by order of His Majesty. Refusal is not an option. Chancellor Torim Val. Selene read it twice, then a third time. Piano tutor. She didn't even know the king played. What does it say? Her mother repeated, her voice rising. Selene handed her the letter without a word. Her mother read it and went white as snow. No, she whispered. No, this isn't. Selene, you can't. But they both knew the truth. She didn't have a choice. 3 days later, Selene stood at the gates of the royal fortress, a single bag slung over her shoulder, her heart hammering in her chest. The fortress loomed above her, all black stone and iron, perched on the edge of a cliff like a predator watching the valley below. It looked exactly like the stories said it would. Cold, unyielding, dangerous. The gates opened, and Selene stepped inside. She didn't know what waited for her, but she knew one thing for certain. The man she danced with wasn't just a king. He was a weapon barely holding itself together. And somehow, without meaning to, she'd just become the only thing standing between him and the edge. The first thing Selene noticed when she stepped through the fortress gates was the silence. Not peaceful silence, the kind that pressed against your ears until you wanted to scream just to break it. The courtyard was massive, paved in dark stone that seemed to swallow light. No gardens, no fountains, just cold architecture and the faint echo of her footsteps as a steward in gray robes led her deeper into the complex. She'd expected guards, servants, some sign of life, but the halls were empty. The steward, a thin man with hollow eyes who'd introduced himself as Marthin, hadn't spoken a word since collecting her at the gate. He just walked, his robes whispering against the floor, occasionally glancing back to make sure she was still following. Selene gripped the strap of her bag tighter. How many people live here? Marthen didn't turn. Enough. That's not an answer. No. She bit back a sharp reply. Arguing with him wouldn't help, but the deeper they went, the more her skin prickled with unease. The fortress felt wrong, like a living thing holding its breath. They climbed a spiral staircase, passed through a corridor lined with portraits of men who all had the same dark eyes, the same hard jaw, kings. All dead now. Selene's gaze lingered on the last one. The paint was faded, the frame cracked. Beneath it, a tarnished plaque read, Erendor Voss, so the last sane king. Her stomach twisted. Is it true? She asked quietly. Marthen stopped. Is what true? The curse. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, without looking at her, he replied, Every king in that line lost his mind before he died. Some sooner than others. His voice dropped. King Kadrin's father lasted 6 years after his coronation. His grandfather, 4. Selene's throat tightened. And Kadrin? Marthen finally turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made her blood run cold. 3 years. He's already lasted longer than anyone expected. Then why? Because he's stronger. Marthen's jaw clenched. And because he refuses to let it win. But strength only holds so long, Miss Ardis. Eventually, the curse takes everyone. He turned and continued walking. Selene stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding. 3 years. She danced with a man who was already halfway to madness. And now she was living in his fortress. She forced herself to move, following Marthen through another set of doors and into a wide hallway lined with tall windows. Pale morning light spilled across the floor, and for the first time she saw movement, a servant carrying linens, a guard stationed near a doorway. They looked at her as she passed. No curiosity, no welcome, just wariness. Marthen stopped in front of a heavy wooden door and pushed it open. Your quarters. Selene stepped inside. The room was larger than she'd expected. Stone walls softened by thick tapestries, a bed with dark wool blankets, a writing desk near the window, and in the corner a small fireplace already crackling with low flames. It was austere, but it was warm. Meals are brought at dawn, midday, and dusk, Marthen said. You're not to wander the fortress alone. If you need something, ring the bell. He gestured to a small bronze bell on the desk. Your first lesson is tomorrow morning. You'll be escorted. Selene turned to face him. Where is he? Marthen's expression didn't change. Not your concern. I was summoned here to tutor him. That makes it my concern. You were summoned here to play the piano, Miss Ardis. Nothing more. His voice hardened. And if you're smart, you'll remember that. He left before she could respond, pulling the door shut behind him. Selene stood in the center of the room, her pulse still racing. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand answers, but instead she sank onto the edge of the bed and pressed her hands to her face. What had she gotten herself into? Yes. The night passed slowly. Selene barely slept. Every creak of the walls, every gust of wind against the windows made her jump. She kept replaying the ball in her mind, the way Kadrin had looked at her, the way his hand had felt against hers, the heat that had surged between them like something alive. It didn't make sense. None of it did. By the time dawn broke, she was exhausted and jittery, her nerves stretched thin. A servant arrived with breakfast, bread, cheese, and weak tea, and left without speaking. Selene forced herself to eat, though her stomach was in knots. An hour later, Marthen returned. It's time. She followed him through the fortress again, this time to the eastern wing. The corridors grew quieter, the air colder, fewer servants, fewer guards. They stopped in front of a set of double doors carved with intricate patterns, wolves, trees, mountains. Marthen knocked once, then pushed the doors open. The room beyond was vast. A music hall, Selene realized. High ceilings, walls lined with bookshelves, and in the center, a grand piano, polished black, gleaming in the light from the tall windows. It was beautiful, and it was empty. Selene stepped inside slowly, her footsteps echoing. Where is he? He'll join you when he's ready. Martha gestured to the piano. Play. I don't play, he repeated. That's why you're here. Then he left. The doors closed with a heavy thud, and Selene was alone. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the piano. Then, slowly, she crossed the room and sat on the bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She hadn't played in weeks, not since before the engagement, before everything had fallen apart. But muscle memory took over, and she pressed down gently, testing the sound. The note rang clear and pure. Selene exhaled, and then she began to play. It started soft, a slow, melancholy melody that her mother had taught her as a child. The kind of piece you played when you needed to think, to breathe, to feel something other than the chaos pressing in. Her fingers moved across the keys, and the tension in her chest began to ease. She didn't notice when the door opened, didn't notice the figure standing in the shadows, watching. Not until the music swelled and she reached the final chord, and a low voice cut through the silence. Don't stop! Selene's hands froze. She turned sharply. Cadron stood near the doorway, half hidden in shadow, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked worse than he had at the ball, his jaw tight, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion, his posture rigid like he was bracing against some invisible weight. But he was watching her, waiting. Selene's pulse hammered. I didn't hear you come in. I know. He stepped forward into the light. Keep playing. Please. The word was quiet, almost broken. Selene swallowed hard and turned back to the piano. Her hands trembled as she placed them on the keys again. She didn't know what to play, didn't know what he wanted, so she just played. Another piece. Faster this time. Something with more life, more movement. Her fingers danced across the keys and the music filled the hall, chasing away the silence. She didn't look at him, but she felt him. Felt the way the air shifted when he moved closer. Felt the weight of his gaze on her like a physical thing. And then, quietly, she heard it. His breathing. It had been ragged when he first walked in. Uneven, strained. But now, as the music continued, it began to slow, steady, calm. Selene's chest tightened. She played until her fingers ached, until the piece ended and the final note faded into nothing. Silence settled over the room again, but this time it didn't feel suffocating. Thank you, Cadron said quietly. Selene turned to face him. He was standing closer now, just a few feet away, and she could see the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Does it help? She asked before she could stop herself. His jaw tightened. More than it should. Why? I don't know. She believed him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Cadron stepped back, his expression shuddering. You'll play every morning, 1 hour. Martha will escort you. And that's it? That's it. Why? Selene stood, her hands curling into fists at her sides. You dragged me here to play piano for an hour a day? Yes. That's insane. His eyes flashed, just for a second, and she saw it again. That flicker of amber, that hint of something dangerous lurking just beneath the surface. Then leave, he said coldly. Her breath caught. He turned toward the door. Wait. The word came out sharper than she intended. Cadron stopped but didn't turn around. Selene's heart pounded. She didn't know why she'd said it, didn't know what she wanted from him, but she couldn't let him walk away. Not like this. What happened at the ball? She said quietly. What was that? His shoulders tensed. A mistake. It didn't feel like a mistake. It was. His voice was hard, final. And it won't happen again. Then he left. The doors closed behind him with a sharp crack, and Selene stood alone in the music hall, her hands shaking, her mind racing. A mistake. That's what he'd called it. But she'd felt the way his control had fractured the moment their hands touched. Seen the way his eyes had burned. Whatever had happened between them, it wasn't a mistake. It was something far more dangerous. The days that followed fell into a strange, unsettling rhythm. Every morning, Martha would escort Selene to the music hall. She would play. Cadron would appear, sometimes early, sometimes late. and stand in silence, listening. He never spoke unless she asked him a direct question, never came closer than necessary, but he was always there. And every time she played, she watched the tension bleed out of him, watched his breathing slow, watched the faint glow fade from his eyes. It was like the music was the only thing holding him together. Selene didn't understand it, but she didn't stop playing. The rest of her time in the fortress was spent alone. Meals in her room, long hours staring out the window at the mountains in the distance. Occasionally she'd see servants in the halls, but they avoided her gaze, hurrying past like she carried some kind of contagion. She was invisible here, a tool, nothing more. It should have been easier that way, but it wasn't, because every morning when she sat at that piano and Kadrin walked into the room, she felt it again. That pull, sharp and undeniable, like something inside her recognized something inside him, and it terrified her. On the 5th day, everything changed. Selene was alone in her room, staring at the dying embers in the fireplace, when she heard it. A sound, low, guttural, a growl. Her blood went cold. It was coming from somewhere deep in the fortress, below her maybe, or in another wing entirely. But even through the thick stone walls, she could hear it. And it didn't sound human. Selene stood slowly, her heart pounding. She crossed to the door and pressed her ear against the wood. Silence. Then another growl, closer this time, followed by a crash. Selene's breath hitched. She shouldn't go out there. She knew that. But her hand was already on the doorknob, already turning it. The hallway was empty. Dim torchlight flickered along the walls, casting long shadows. Another crash echoed from somewhere to her left, and she heard voices, shouting, frantic. Selene moved before she could think. She followed the sound, her footsteps quick and silent, her pulse hammering in her ears. The voices grew louder. She turned a corner and stopped dead. Ahead, a group of guards surrounded a heavy iron door. One of them was shouting orders. Another was fumbling with a set of keys, his hands shaking so badly he kept dropping them. And from behind the door came another sound, low, vicious, inhuman. Selene's stomach dropped. "What's happening?" she demanded. The guards turned sharply, their faces pale. "Get back to your quarters," one of them snapped. "Now!" "What's behind that door?" "None of your concern." Another crash. The door shuddered on its hinges. One of the guards swore. "We need to sedate him before..." "Before what?" Selene stepped forward. "Before he breaks through?" The guard's jaw tightened. "Yes." Her breath caught. "That's him, isn't it? Kadrin?" No one answered, but they didn't have to. Selene's hands curled into fists. "Let me in." "Absolutely not." "He listens to the music," she said quickly. "You've seen it. Every morning when I play, he calms down. Let me try." "You'll get yourself killed. Then that's my choice." The guard stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. But before he could argue, the door shuddered again, and this time the hinges cracked. The guard stepped back, weapons drawn. Selene didn't wait for permission. She grabbed the keys from the trembling guard's hand, shoved them into the lock, and turned. The door swung open, and she stepped inside. Oh, the room was dark, cold. Selene's eyes adjusted slowly, and when they did, her breath caught in her throat. Kadrin was on the far side of the room, his back to her, his shoulders heaving with each ragged breath. His shirt was torn, his hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles had split and bled. And his eyes. Even from across the room, she could see the glow. Bright, burning, not human. "Kadrin," she said quietly. He didn't move. "Kadrin," she repeated, louder this time. His head turned slightly, and when his gaze locked on hers, Selene's entire body went rigid. There was nothing left of the man she'd seen in the music hall. Only the curse. He snarled, a sound that didn't belong in a human throat, and took a step toward her. Selene's instinct screamed at her to run, but she didn't. Instead, she did the only thing she could think of. She started to hum, soft, low, the same melody she'd played that first morning. Kadrin froze. His eyes flickered, amber fading, just for a second. Selene kept humming, her voice trembling but steady. One step, then another. She moved closer, slowly, carefully, never breaking eye contact. Kadrin's breathing hitched, his fists unclenched slightly. And then, without thinking, Selene reached out and placed her hand on his chest. The reaction was instant. Kadrin's entire body shuddered. His eyes squeezed shut, his jaw clenching so hard she heard his teeth crack. But he didn't pull away. Selene kept her hand there, kept humming, kept breathing. And slowly, agonizingly slowly, the glow began to fade. His breathing evened out, his fists unclenched. And when he finally opened his eyes again, they were dark. Human. He stared down at her, his expression raw and broken. You shouldn't be here. I know. You could have died. I know. His hand came up, covering hers where it rested against his chest. His palm was warm, shaking. Why? He whispered. Selene didn't have an answer, so she just stood there, her hand pressed against his heart, feeling it beat in time with hers. And for the first time since she'd arrived, the silence didn't feel so suffocating anymore. Kadrin pulled away first, not gently, not gradually. He jerked back like her touch had burned him, his hand dropping from hers, his breath coming hard and fast. Get out, he said, his voice raw. Selene blinked, still standing in the middle of the darkened room, her hand suspended in the air where his chest had been a moment before. What? Get out. He turned away from her, his shoulders rigid, his fists clenched again, but this time she could see him forcing them open, forcing himself to breathe. Kadrin, now Selene. The way he said her name, broken, desperate, made her chest ache, but she didn't move. I'm not leaving you like this. You don't have a choice. He still wouldn't look at her. The guards are outside. They'll escort you back. I don't care about the guards. You should. His voice dropped to something darker, colder. Because the next time I lose control, you might not be able to pull me back. Selene's pulse stuttered. You didn't hurt me. Not yet. The words hung between them like a blade. Before she could respond, the door behind her swung open. Two guards stepped inside, their expressions hard, their hands on their weapons. Miss Ardis, one of them said stiffly, you need to leave, now. She wanted to argue, wanted to turn back to Kadrin and demand answers, demand to know what the hell was happening to him, why her presence seemed to be the only thing that helped, why he kept pushing her away when she was the only one who'd gotten close enough to matter. But Kadrin still had his back to her, still wouldn't look. So she let the guards lead her out. The door slammed shut behind her, the lock turning with a heavy click. And Selene stood in the hallway, her hands shaking, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. One of the guards gave her a look, half pity, half warning. You shouldn't have done that. I know. He could have killed you. But he didn't. The guard's jaw tightened. Next time you might not be so lucky. He turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the flickering torchlight. Selene pressed her back against the cold stone wall and closed her eyes. Her hand still tingled where she'd touched him, and somewhere deep in her chest, that pull, the one she didn't understand, didn't want, grew stronger. What? The next morning, Marthin didn't come to escort her. Selene waited in her room, pacing, her nerves frayed. An hour passed. Then 2. No knock. No summons. She tried the door. It wasn't locked. The hallways were empty again, but this time the silence felt different, heavier, like the entire fortress was holding its breath. She made her way to the music hall on her own, half expecting to find it locked, half expecting to be turned away. But the doors were open, and inside, sitting on the bench in front of the piano, was Kadrin. Selene stopped in the doorway. He looked up slowly, and the exhaustion on his face nearly knocked the air out of her lungs. He hadn't slept. She could see it in the shadows under his eyes, the tightness in his jaw, the way his hands rested too carefully on his knees, like he didn't trust them. You came, he said quietly. You didn't send anyone to stop me. No. Selene stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Why? Kadrin didn't answer right away. He just stared at the piano keys, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he said, because I need to understand what you do to me. Her breath caught. Sit. He gestured to the bench beside him. Selene hesitated. Every instinct told her this was dangerous. that getting closer to him, physically, emotionally, was a mistake she'd regret. But she sat anyway. The space between them on the bench was barely 6 inches. She could feel the heat radiating off him, could hear the faint unevenness in his breathing. "Play," Kadrin said. Selene's hands moved to the keys. "What do you want to hear?" "Anything." So she played. Not the soft, melancholy pieces she'd started with. This time she chose something different, something with tension, with movement, with a pulse that matched the way her heart was racing. Her fingers flew across the keys, and the music filled the hall, sharp and alive. And beside her, Kadrin's breathing began to slow. She could feel it. Feel the way his body relaxed, degree by degree. Feel the way the tension bled out of his shoulders, his jaw, his hands. When the piece ended, silence settled over them like a blanket. "How long have you had the curse?" Selene asked quietly. Kadrin's jaw tightened. "Since my father died. 3 years. And before that? Before that I watched it destroy him." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Watched him go from the strongest man I knew to something unrecognizable. He begged me to kill him at the end, said it would be a mercy." Selene's chest tightened. "Did you?" "No." Kadrin's hands curled into fists on his knees. "Someone else did. One of his own guards. Put a blade through his heart while he slept." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was a kindness." The words were bitter, hollow. Selene turned to look at him. "Is that what you want? Someone to do the same for you?" Kadrin met her gaze, and the rawness in his eyes nearly broke her. "I want to not become the thing I'm turning into, but we don't always get what we want. You're not a thing. Not yet." "Kadrin, you don't understand." He stood abruptly, pacing away from the piano. "Every day it gets harder. Harder to think. Harder to control it. The rage, it's always there now, just under the surface. Waiting." He stopped, his back to her. "And the only time it stops, the only time I feel like myself, is when you're near." Selene's pulse hammered. "Why?" "I don't know." He turned to face her, and the frustration in his expression was almost frightening. "I've tried to figure it out, tried to understand what makes you different, but there's nothing, no logic, no reason. You're just—" He broke off, shaking his head. "You shouldn't be able to do this." "Do what?" "Make me human again." The words hit her like a blow. Selene stood slowly, her legs unsteady. "Maybe that's the point." "What?" "Maybe the curse isn't just about rage. Maybe it's about isolation, about cutting yourself off from everything that makes you human." She took a step toward him. "And maybe the only way to fight it is to let someone in." Kadrin stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he laughed, sharp, bitter. "You think connection is the cure? That's what you're going with? I think it's worth trying. And if you're wrong, if letting you close just makes it worse, then we deal with it." "We?" His eyes flashed. "There is no we, Selene. You're here because I can't function without you, but that doesn't make you part of this. It makes you a crutch. And the second I don't need you anymore, you'll what? Send me away?" "Yes." The word was final. Absolute. Selene's hands curled into fists at her sides. "You're a coward." Kadrin went very still. "Excuse me?" "You're terrified of what might happen if you actually let someone help you. So you push everyone away and tell yourself it's for their own good." Her voice rose. "But it's not. It's because you're scared." "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" She stepped closer, close enough to see the faint tremor in his hands. "You called me here because you needed me. And now that I'm here, now that it's working, you can't stand it, because it means you're not as strong as you thought. It means you need someone." Kadrin's jaw clenched. "Get out." "No." "Selene." "I'm not leaving." Her voice shook, but she held her ground. "Not until you stop lying to yourself." For a moment she thought he might actually throw her out, thought she might have pushed too far, but instead, Kadrin closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands gripping her shoulders, his face inches from hers. "You want the truth?" His voice was low, dangerous. "The truth is that every time you're near me, I lose a little more control. Every time you touch me, Every time you look at me like that, it gets harder to remember why I'm supposed to stay away." Selene's breath hitched. "Then stop trying." "You don't understand what you're asking." "Yes, I do." His grip tightened, his eyes burning into hers. "If I let go, if I stop fighting this, I won't be able to stop." "Then don't." The words hung between them, reckless and dangerous. And then Kadrin kissed her. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't careful. It was raw and desperate, and everything he'd been holding back for weeks. Selene gasped against his mouth, her hands grabbing onto his shirt, pulling him closer even as her mind screamed that this was insane, that this was exactly what he'd warned her against. But she didn't care, because the moment his lips touched hers, that pull, the one she'd felt since the ball, ignited. And she knew. This wasn't just attraction, it was something deeper, something that had nothing to do with logic or reason, something that terrified her. Kadrin pulled back abruptly, his breathing ragged, his eyes wide with something that looked like shock. "We can't," his voice cracked. "Selene, we can't do this." "Why not?" "Because it'll destroy you." He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "The bond, it's already starting. I can feel it. And if we don't stop now—" "What bond?" He stared at her, his expression torn between anguish and fury. "The mating bond. The one that ties an alpha to their—" He broke off, shaking his head. "It doesn't matter. It can't happen." "Why not?" "Because I'm dying, Selene." The words exploded out of him, raw and broken. "The curse is killing me. And if you bond with me, if you tie yourself to me, you'll feel every second of it. You'll feel me lose my mind, feel me turn into a monster, and there won't be anything either of us can do to stop it." Selene's chest tightened, her hands trembling. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. I've seen it happen. My father's mate didn't survive a year after he lost control. The bond killed her." "That's not going to happen to us." "You can't promise that." "Neither can you." Kadrin turned away from her, his shoulders shaking. "I won't do that to you. I won't." Selene stepped forward, her voice quiet but steady. "It's not your choice." He turned sharply. "What?" "You don't get to decide for me. If I want to stay, if I want to fight this with you, that's my choice, not yours." "Selene, I'm not asking for your permission, Kadrin. I'm telling you." Her voice hardened. "I'm staying, and if that scares you, then you're going to have to deal with it." For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then quietly, he said, "You're going to regret this." "Maybe, but it'll be my regret, not yours." Before he could respond, the door to the music hall slammed open. Chancellor Torim Vale strode inside, his expression grim, 2 guards flanking him. Kadrin straightened immediately, his entire demeanor shifting. "What is it?" Tarim's gaze flicked to Selene, then back to Kadrin. "We need to talk, privately." "Anything you have to say, you can say in front of her." Tarim's jaw tightened. "Your Majesty." "Now, Torim." The Chancellor exhaled sharply. "The Council has called an emergency session. They're demanding you take a mate." Kadrin went very still. "No. It's not a request. They're invoking the succession clause. If you don't name an heir or bond with a mate within the next 30 days, they'll declare you unfit to rule." Selene's stomach dropped. Kadrin's hands curled into fists. "They can't do that." "They can, and they will." Torim's voice was ice. "You've avoided this long enough. The Council won't wait anymore." "I don't care what the Council wants." "You should, because if they remove you from power, the curse won't matter. You'll be executed anyway." The words landed like a physical blow. Selene stepped forward. "There has to be another way." Tarim's gaze snapped to her. "This doesn't concern you, Miss Ardis." "Like hell it doesn't." Selene," Kadrin said quietly. "Don't." But she ignored him, her eyes locked on Torim. "You're telling him to bond with someone he doesn't care about just to satisfy a council that's too scared to do anything useful. How is that supposed to help?" Tarim's expression darkened. "The council exists to protect this kingdom, and right now, the biggest threat to it is standing in this room." Kadrin's eyes flashed amber. Tarim didn't flinch. 30 days, Your Majesty. That's all you have." Then he turned and left, the guards following. The door slammed shut. Silence crashed down. Cadron stood frozen, his breathing uneven, his fists still clenched. Selene crossed to him slowly. Cadron, they're going to force me to choose someone. His voice was hollow. And when I do, the bond with you will break. Her chest tightened. Then don't choose anyone. They'll kill me. Then we fight back. There's no fighting this, Selene. The council has the law on their side. Then we change the law. He finally looked at her, and the despair in his eyes nearly broke her. You still don't understand. There is no winning here. No matter what I do, someone loses, and I won't let it be you. It's already me. Her voice cracked. The second you kissed me, it became me. Cadron's jaw worked. Then I made a mistake. Stop saying that. It's the truth. No. Selene grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. The truth is that you're terrified. And instead of fighting, you're giving up. I'm trying to protect you. I don't need your protection. I need you to trust me. I can't. The words hung between them, final and devastating. Selene let go of his arm, stepping back. Then I guess we're done here. She turned and walked toward the door. Selene, don't. She didn't look back. You've made your choice. Now I'm making mine. She left before he could say anything else. The next 3 days were hell. Selene didn't go to the music hall, didn't leave her room, didn't respond when Martha knocked with meal trays or when guards checked to make sure she was still there. She just sat by the window, staring out at the mountains, her mind a tangled mess of anger and hurt, and something sharper, something that felt like grief. She'd been stupid. Stupid to think she could help him. Stupid to think he'd let her. Stupid to fall for a man who was already halfway gone. On the 4th day, Martha appeared again. But this time, he didn't bring food. You're being summoned to the council chambers, he said stiffly. Selene looked up. Why? I don't know, but you don't have a choice. She followed him through the fortress, her pulse quickening with every step. The council chambers were located in the heart of the complex, a vast circular room with high ceilings and walls lined with banners bearing the crests of the kingdom's great houses. At the center of the room sat a long table, and around it sat 12 men and women, all dressed in formal robes, all watching her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to outright hostility. And at the head of the table sat Cadron. He didn't look at her. Chancellor Taurine stood beside him, his hands clasped behind his back. Miss Ardis, thank you for joining us. Selene's gaze swept the room. What is this? A hearing. Taurine's voice was cold. The council has received reports of unusual behavior between you and His Majesty. We're here to determine whether those reports warrant further investigation. Her blood went cold. What reports? That you've been using your influence over the king to manipulate him, that you've been deliberately interfering with his duties, that you've been attempting to form a bond without the council's approval. Selene's hands curled into fists. That's insane. Is it? One of the council members, a stern woman with silver hair, leaned forward. You arrived here under unusual circumstances. You have no title, no rank, no reason to be in this fortress, and yet the king has granted you unprecedented access. Why is that, Miss Ardis? Because he needed... Needed what? The woman interrupted. A distraction? A plaything? Councillor Marin, Cadron said quietly, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. That's enough. Marin didn't back down. With respect, Your Majesty, this woman has no place here, and the longer she stays, the more danger she poses, to you and to the kingdom. She poses no danger. Then why won't you look at her? The question landed like a blow. Cadron's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Taurine cleared his throat. The council has made a decision. Miss Ardis will be removed from the fortress and returned to her family. Effective immediately. Selene's stomach dropped. No. This isn't a negotiation. I don't care. She turned to Cadron. You're really going to let them do this? He still wouldn't look at her. Cadron, it's for the best, he said quietly. Her chest cracked open. You're a coward. His eyes finally met hers, and the pain in them nearly brought her to her knees. But he didn't stop it. 2 guards stepped forward, their hands on her arms. Don't touch me, Selene snapped, jerking away. But they didn't let go. And as they dragged her toward the door, she looked back one last time. Kadrin was still sitting at the head of the table, his hands clenched into fists, his expression unreadable. And she knew. He'd already given up. They sent her home that night. No explanation, no apology, just a carriage, a driver, and a single bag of her belongings. By the time she arrived at her family's estate, the sun was rising. Her mother was waiting at the door, her face pale and drawn. "What happened?" she demanded. Selene didn't answer. She just walked past her, into the house, and locked herself in her room. And for the first time since the ball, she let herself cry. 2 weeks later, her father came to her room with news. "Lord Davin has agreed to move forward with the engagement," he said, his tone brisk. "The wedding will take place in 10 days. Selene looked up from where she sat by the window. "No." Her father's expression hardened. "This isn't a discussion, Selene." "I said no. You don't have a choice." "Yes, I do." She stood, her voice steady. "I'm not marrying him." Her father stepped forward, his face twisted with fury. "You've embarrassed this family enough. You will do your duty." "I don't care about duty." Her voice rose. "I don't care about this family. I don't care about any of it." "Then what do you care about?" She didn't answer. Because the truth was, she didn't know anymore. The night before the wedding, Selene made her decision. She wasn't going to marry Davin. She wasn't going to stay here. She was going to run. She packed a small bag, waited until the house was asleep, and slipped out through the servants' entrance. She didn't have a plan, didn't know where she was going. She just knew she couldn't stay. She made it 3 miles before they found her. Davin's men. They dragged her back, kicking and screaming, and locked her in her room. And the next morning, they dressed her in white and led her to the altar. Selene stood there, numb, her hands shaking, her mind screaming. The priest began the ceremony. Davin smiled, and Selene closed her eyes and felt it. A pull, sharp, desperate. Not hers. Kadrin's. Her eyes snapped open, and somewhere deep in the fortress, miles away, Kadrin felt it too. Kadrin was in the war room when it hit him. A sharp, vicious pull that tore through his chest like a blade, so sudden and brutal he staggered against the table, his hand slamming down hard enough to crack the wood. Chancellor Torim looked up sharply. "Your Majesty!" Kadrin couldn't breathe. His vision blurred, his pulse hammering so loud it drowned out everything else. For a second he thought it was the curse, thought he was losing control again. But this was different. This wasn't rage. This was terror. Not his own, Selene's. He felt it like a vice around his ribs, squeezing tighter with every second. Felt her panic, her desperation, her absolute refusal to accept what was happening. And underneath it all, pain, raw, unbearable. "Something's wrong," he said, his voice hoarse. Torim stepped forward. "What?" Kadrin didn't wait for him to finish. He turned and strode toward the door, his body moving on instinct, every nerve screaming at him to move faster, to get to her, to stop whatever was happening before it was too late. "Your Majesty, wait!" He didn't. He ran. Down the corridors, through the courtyard, past guards who barely had time to step aside. His mind was a blur of half-formed thoughts, all of them circling back to one thing. Selene. She was in danger, and he'd let her go. By the time he reached the stables, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely saddle his horse. One of the stable hands tried to help, but Kadrin snarled at him, a sound that didn't belong in a human throat, and the man stumbled back, white-faced. Kadrin mounted and kicked the horse into a gallop before anyone could stop him. He didn't know where he was going. But the bond did. It pulled him south, toward the valley, toward her family's estate. Every mile felt like an eternity. The horse was fast, but not fast enough. Kadrin's chest burned with the effort of holding himself together, of keeping the curse at bay long enough to reach her. Because if he lost control now, if he let the rage take over before he got to her, she'd be gone. He pushed the horse harder. Selene stood at the altar, her hands clenched so tightly, her nails drew blood. The priest droned on, his voice distant and meaningless. Davin stood beside her, smug and satisfied, his hand resting possessively on her arm. She wanted to scream, to run, to tear the entire room apart, but she couldn't move. Her father sat in the front row, his expression hard and unyielding. Her mother dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, playing the part of the emotional matriarch. Lyra sat beside her, smiling sweetly, and Selene felt like she was drowning. The priest asked a question, something about vows, about commitment, and Davin answered without hesitation, his voice smooth and practiced. Then the priest turned to her. "And do you, Selene Ardis, take this man?" "No." The word came out before she could stop it. The priest blinked. "I'm sorry?" "No," Selene repeated, louder this time. "I don't." Davin's grip on her arm tightened. "Selene," she yanked her arm free. "I'm not doing this." Her father stood abruptly. "Selene, sit down." "No." "You're embarrassing yourself." "I don't care." Her voice cracked, but she held her ground. "I'm not marrying him. I'm not marrying anyone I don't choose." Davin's expression darkened. "You agreed to this." "I never agreed to anything. You and my father decided for me. Well, I'm done letting other people make my choices." The room erupted. Her father stormed toward the altar, his face twisted with fury. Her mother gasped. Guests whispered and pointed, and Davin grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "You're making a mistake," he hissed. Selene met his gaze, her voice cold. "The only mistake I made was not saying no sooner." She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "You think you can just walk away?" Davin's voice dropped, dangerous. "After everything your family owes me, after the arrangement we made, I don't owe you anything. Your father does. And if you don't go through with this, I'll make sure he pays for it." Selene's stomach twisted. "You can't." "I can. And I will." He leaned closer, his breath hot against her ear. "So unless you want to watch your family lose everything, you'll stand here, smile, and finish the ceremony." Fear shot through her. Not for herself, for her family. As much as she hated them right now, as much as she wanted to walk away and never look back, she couldn't let them be destroyed because of her. Davin saw the hesitation in her eyes and smiled. "That's what I thought." He turned back to the priest. "Continue." The priest cleared his throat nervously. "As I was saying," the doors at the back of the hall slammed open. Everyone turned, and Kadrin Voss walked in. He looked like hell. His clothes were disheveled, his hair wind-tangled, his face pale and drawn. But his eyes burned, not with the curse, with something far more dangerous. Selene's breath caught. Kadrin's gaze swept the room, landing on her, and the rage that flickered across his face was enough to make the entire hall go silent. Then his gaze shifted to Davin, and the temperature dropped. "Let her go," Kadrin said quietly. Davin's grip on Selene's wrist tightened. "This is a private ceremony, Your Majesty. You have no business here." "Let her go." It wasn't a request, it was a command, and the weight of it, the sheer, undeniable authority in his voice, made everyone in the room take a step back. Everyone except Davin. "She's my fiancée," he said, his voice tight. "And this wedding is happening whether you like it or not." Kadrin took a step forward. "She's not your anything. You don't have a claim to her." "Don't I?" The question hung in the air, sharp and dangerous. Selene's pulse hammered. She could feel the bond between them, alive, burning, impossible to ignore. And so could Kadrin. He crossed the hall in long, deliberate strides, and the crowd parted for him like water. Davin stood his ground, but Selene could see the fear creeping into his expression. Kadrin stopped in front of them, his gaze locked on Davin's hand where it gripped Selene's wrist. "If you don't let her go in the next 3 seconds," Kadrin said quietly, "I'm going to break every bone in your hand." Davin's jaw clenched. "You wouldn't dare." Kadrin moved, fast, brutal. He grabbed Davin's wrist and twisted, hard enough that Davin yelped and released Selene immediately. Then Kadrin shoved him back, and Davin stumbled, barely catching himself on the edge of the altar. Kadrin turned to Selene, his expression softening just slightly. "Are you all right?" She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Her father stormed forward. "Your Majesty, this is outrageous." Kadrin didn't even look at him. "She's leaving with me. You have no right." "I have every right." Kadrin's voice was ice. "She's mine." The words sent a shockwave through the room. Celine's breath hitched. Davin pushed himself upright, his face twisted with fury. She's already promised to me. The contract is signed. I don't care about your contract. The law protects bonded mates above all else. Kadrin's gaze swept the room, and as of 3 weeks ago, the bond between Selene Ardis and myself began forming, which means any contract made after that point is void. Silence. Selene stared at him. What? Kadrin's eyes met hers. You felt it, at the ball, the moment we touched. She had. She'd felt it every day since, but she hadn't known what it meant. Her father's face went white. That's impossible. She's never been presented to the council. The bond doesn't ask for permission, Kadrin said coldly. It just happens. And it happened to us. Davin's hands curled into fists. You're lying. Am I? Kadrin turned to face him fully. Then explain how I knew she was in danger. Explain how I felt her fear from miles away. Explain how I'm standing here right now, seconds away from tearing you apart, because every instinct I have is screaming at me to protect her. Davin didn't have an answer. No one did. Kadrin extended his hand towards Selene. Come with me. She hesitated. Not because she didn't want to, but because the second she took his hand, the second she made that choice, there would be no going back. Her father stepped forward. Selene, if you leave with him, you are no longer part of this family. Her mother gasped. You can't mean that. I do. His voice was hard. She's already disgraced us enough. If she walks out that door, she's dead to me. Selene looked at him, at the man who'd spent her entire life treating her like a bargaining chip. And she realized she didn't care. She turned back to Kadrin and took his hand. The second their fingers touched, the bond flared to life. Selene gasped, her knees buckling slightly, and Kadrin caught her, his arm wrapping around her waist. I've got you, he said quietly. She believed him. He turned, pulling her close, and started toward the door. You can't do this, Davin shouted. I'll take this to the council. I'll have you removed. Kadrin stopped, turned, and the look he gave Davin was enough to make the man go pale. Try it, Kadrin said quietly, and I'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your very short life. Then he left, Selene at his side. They rode back to the fortress in silence. Selene sat in front of Kadrin on the horse, his arms bracketing her, his chest pressed against her back. She could feel his heartbeat, steady, strong, and the warmth of his body against hers. The bond hummed between them, alive and undeniable, but neither of them spoke. Not until they reached the gates. Kadrin dismounted first, then helped her down, his hands lingering on her waist. Are you all right? He asked quietly. Selene nodded. I think so. He studied her face, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry. For what? For sending you away. For letting them take you. His jaw tightened. For being too much of a coward to fight for you sooner. Her chest ached. You came for me. I should have done it weeks ago. You're doing it now. That's what matters. Kadrin's hand came up, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. I meant what I said in there. You're mine, and I'm not letting anyone take you away again. Selene's breath caught. What does that mean? It means I'm claiming you, publicly, in front of the council, the court, the entire kingdom. His voice dropped. And I'm not asking for their permission. They'll fight you. Let them. Kadrin, I don't care what they do, Selene. I don't care if they try to remove me, try to kill me, try to tear this kingdom apart. I'm done pretending I can do this alone. His hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. I need you, and I'm not ashamed of that anymore. Selene's eyes burned. What about the curse? We'll figure it out, together. And if we can't, then at least I won't die alone. The words should have been terrifying, but instead they felt like a promise. Selene leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. You are. His voice was certain. You've been strong enough since the beginning. I was just too blind to see it. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. What happens now? Now? Kadrin's mouth curved into a faint, dangerous smile. Now we go to war. The council session was called for the next morning. Kadrin didn't ask for it. He demanded it, and when the council members filed into the chamber, their expressions ranged from wary to outright hostile. Chancellor Torim stood at the head of the table, his face pale. "Your Majesty, this is highly irregular." "I don't care." Kadrin's voice was flat. "Sit down." Torim hesitated, then obeyed. Kadrin stood at the center of the room, Selene beside him. He'd insisted she be there despite her protests. And now, with every eye in the room on her, she felt her skin crawl. But Kadrin's hand found hers, his grip steady, and she didn't let go. "I've called you here to make an announcement," Kadrin said. "Selene Ardis is my mate. The bond has formed, and as of today she will be recognized as such." The room erupted. "This is unacceptable. She has no title. The succession clause. Enough." Kadrin's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "I don't care about the succession clause. I don't care about your objections. The bond is real. And under the law, it supersedes any contract, any arrangement, any decision you think you have the right to make." Councillor Marin stood, her expression cold. "The law also states that a mate must be approved by the council. The law states that a bonded mate cannot be separated from their alpha. Approval is a formality, not a requirement. And if we refuse to recognize her," Kadrin's eyes flashed, "then you're in violation of the law, and I'll have you removed." Marin's jaw tightened. "You're threatening us?" "I'm telling you the truth." Torim stepped forward, his voice tight. "Your Majesty, even if we acknowledge the bond, the fact remains, you have no heir. The curse will kill you, and when it does, the kingdom will fall into chaos. Then we'll deal with it when the time comes. That's not good enough. It's going to have to be." The room went silent, and then slowly, Councillor Marin leaned back in her chair. "You're willing to destroy this kingdom for her?" Kadrin's gaze didn't waver. "I'm willing to fight for her. If that destroys the kingdom, then the kingdom wasn't worth saving." Selene's breath caught. Marin studied him for a long moment. Then, finally, she said, "You've changed, Your Majesty." "Yes." "For better or worse?" Kadrin glanced at Selene. "Better." Marin's expression softened, just slightly. "Then perhaps there's hope for you yet." She stood. "I'll support the bond, on one condition." Kadrin's eyes narrowed. "What condition?" "You stop hiding. Stop pretending the curse doesn't exist. Stop treating this kingdom like it's a burden you have to carry alone." Her voice hardened. "If you want us to trust you, if you want us to follow you, then you need to let us help." Kadrin hesitated. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Agreed." Marin glanced around the table. "Anyone else object?" No one spoke. And just like that, the tide turned. That night, Kadrin found Selene in the music hall. She was sitting at the piano, her fingers resting lightly on the keys, but she wasn't playing. He crossed the room quietly and sat beside her. "Are you all right?" he asked. Selene nodded. "I think so." "You don't sound sure." "I'm not." She looked at him, her expression raw. "Everything just changed. My entire life, my family, my future. It's all gone. And I don't know if I made the right choice." Kadrin's hand covered hers on the keys. "Do you regret it?" "No." The answer came without hesitation. "But I'm scared." "So am I." She blinked. "You are?" "Terrified." His voice was quiet, honest. "I've spent 3 years trying to keep everyone at a distance, trying to convince myself I could survive this alone. And now—" He broke off, shaking his head. "Now I can't imagine doing it without you." Selene's chest tightened. "What if the curse wins?" "Then we'll face it together." "Kadrin, I mean it, Selene. I don't care what happens. I don't care how bad it gets. As long as you're with me, I'll keep fighting." Her eyes burned. "You can't promise that." "Yes, I can." He turned to face her fully, his hand cupping her face. "Because you make me want to fight. You make me believe I'm more than just the curse. And that's something I haven't felt in a long time. Selene leaned into his touch, her voice breaking. I don't know how to save you. You already have. And then he kissed her, slow, gentle, like he had all the time in the world. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers, his breathing uneven. Play for me? He asked quietly. Selene smiled, her hands moving to the keys, and as the music filled the hall soft and steady, Kadrin closed his eyes. For the first time in 3 years, the curse was silent, and for the first time in his life, he felt whole. The music ended, the final note hanging in the air like a question waiting to be answered. Kadrin opened his eyes slowly, and for a moment Selene saw something she'd never seen before in his expression. Peace. It didn't last long. A sharp knock echoed through the hall, and Marthen appeared in the doorway, his face grim. Your Majesty, we have a situation. Kadrin's jaw tightened. What kind of situation? Lord Davenhale has petitioned the High Court. He's claiming breach of contract and demanding compensation. Marthen's voice dropped. He's also filed a formal challenge to the bond. Says it was formed under duress and should be dissolved. Selene's stomach twisted. Kadrin stood slowly, his hands curling into fists. On what grounds? That Miss Ardis was coerced. That you used your position as king to manipulate her into bonding with you against her will. That's insane. It's also legal. If he can prove coercion, the High Court can dissolve the bond and force her back into the original contract. Selene stood abruptly. They can't do that. Marthen's expression was sympathetic but unyielding. They can. And they will, unless you can prove the bond was formed willingly. It was, Selene said sharply. Then you'll need to say that, in front of the court, under oath. Kadrin turned to her. You don't have to do this. I can fight him. No. Selene's voice was firm. He's using me as a weapon because he knows he can't touch you directly. If I don't stand up to him, he'll keep coming after us. Selene, I'm not afraid of him. Her jaw set. And I'm not letting him take this away from us. Kadrin searched her face for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. All right, we do this together. Try. The High Court convened 3 days later in the capital, a sprawling city at the base of the mountains, far enough from the fortress that the journey required 2 days of hard riding. Selene had never been to the capital before. It was loud, crowded, overwhelming. The streets were packed with merchants, nobles, common folk, all moving with a frantic energy that made her head spin. The courthouse itself was a massive stone building in the heart of the city, its columns carved with symbols of justice and law. Inside, the main chamber was circular, with tiered seating that rose toward a domed ceiling. At the center sat a panel of 5 judges, 3 men, 2 women, all dressed in dark robes, their expressions unreadable. Selene stood beside Kadrin at the defendant's table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Across the room, Davin sat with his own legal counsel, his expression smug and confident. The head judge, a severe woman with iron-gray hair, struck her gavel against the desk. This court is now in session. We are here to examine the petition filed by Lord Davenhale regarding the bonding contract between himself and Miss Selene Ardis, and the subsequent claim of King Kadrin Voss. Lord Hale, you may present your case. Davin stood, smoothing his jacket. Thank you, Your Honor. The facts are simple. Miss Ardis and I were engaged in a legally binding contract, signed by both of our families. This contract was violated when King Kadrin interfered and coerced Miss Ardis into forming a bond with him instead. Coerced how? One of the judges asked. By leveraging his position as king, by using fear and intimidation to force her into compliance. Davin's voice was smooth, practiced. Miss Ardis had no choice but to obey him, and as a result, I have been denied what was rightfully mine. Selene's hands curled into fists under the table. The head judge turned to Kadrin. Your Majesty, how do you respond? Kadrin stood, his voice calm and measured. The bond between myself and Miss Ardis was not coerced. It formed naturally, as bonds do. She chose to accept it of her own free will. Can you prove that? Yes. She's here. Ask her yourself. The judge's gaze shifted to Selene. Miss Ardis, please stand. Selene's pulse hammered as she rose to her feet. Did King Kadrin coerce you into forming a bond with him? The judge asked. No. Did he threaten you? No. Did he use his position as king to pressure you in any way? No. Selene's voice was steady. He gave me a choice, and I made it. Davin's lawyer stood abruptly. Your Honor, with all due respect, Miss Ardis was living in the king's fortress at the time the bond formed. She was isolated from her family, surrounded by his guards, entirely dependent on his goodwill. How can we be certain she wasn't afraid to refuse him? Because I wasn't afraid, Selene said sharply. I was angry, I was confused, but I wasn't afraid of him. Then why did you agree to bond with him? Selene hesitated, her gaze flicking to Kadrin. He gave her a small nod. She turned back to the court. Because I wanted to. Because the bond was already there, whether I acknowledged it or not. And because, her voice softened, because I couldn't imagine walking away from him. The room went silent. Davin's expression darkened. That doesn't change the fact that she was contractually obligated to me. The contract was signed before the bond formed, Kadrin said coldly. Which means it's void. Only if the bond was legitimate. It is. Prove it. Kadrin's eyes flashed. How? Davin's lawyer smiled thinly. The law states that a bonded pair shares a connection that cannot be faked. If the bond is real, then Miss Ardis should be able to sense King Kadrin's emotional state without him speaking, and vice versa. Selene's breath caught. The head judge leaned forward. Is this true, Your Majesty? Kadrin's jaw tightened. Yes. Then we'll test it. The judge gestured to the bailiff. Separate them. Place them on opposite sides of the chamber. Selene's pulse spiked as the bailiff approached, but Kadrin's hand found hers under the table, squeezing once before he let go. It's all right, he said quietly. I've got you. She nodded even though her heart was racing. The bailiff led her to the far side of the room, positioning her so that her back was to Kadrin. She couldn't see him, couldn't hear him, but she could feel him. The bond hummed between them, alive and undeniable. The head judge addressed Kadrin. Your Majesty, I'm going to ask you a series of questions. You will answer them silently. Miss Ardis, you will tell us what emotions you sense from him. Selene swallowed hard. All right. The judge paused, then asked the first question. Your Majesty, do you regret forming the bond with Miss Ardis? Selene felt the answer immediately, a sharp, unequivocal surge of refusal. No, she said. He doesn't regret it. The judge made a note. Are you afraid of what the court will decide today? Another surge, this one tinged with something darker. Worry. Not for himself. For her. He's not afraid for himself, Selene said quietly. But he's afraid for me. Kadrin's voice cut through the silence. That's enough. The judge raised an eyebrow. We are not finished. Yes, we are. Kadrin's tone was final. The bond is real. You've seen the proof. There's nothing more to discuss. Davin stood. Your Honor, this proves nothing. She could be guessing. She's not guessing, Kadrin said, his voice hard. And if you question the legitimacy of this bond one more time, I'll make you regret it. The threat hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Davin's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. The head judge studied them both for a long moment. Then, finally, she struck her gavel. The court acknowledges the bond between King Kadrin Voss and Miss Selene Ardis as legitimate. Lord Hale's petition is denied. The original contract is void. Selene's knees nearly buckled with relief. Davin's face went white. This is outrageous. This court's decision is final. The judge's voice was ice. You're dismissed, Lord Hale. Davin stared at her, his hands shaking with barely restrained fury. Then, without another word, he turned and stormed out of the chamber. Selene exhaled shakily, her hands trembling. Kadrin crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. You did it, he said quietly. She buried her face in his chest. We did it. They returned to the fortress that night, exhausted but victorious. But Selene knew the fight wasn't over. The court had acknowledged the bond. But the curse was still there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting, and sooner or later it would come for him again. She just didn't know when, so... 2 weeks later, Kadrin collapsed. It happened in the middle of a council meeting. One moment he was standing at the head of the table. his voice steady as he outlined a new policy. The next, he staggered, his hand slamming down on the table to catch himself. Selene was at his side in an instant. "Kadrin!" His eyes were glowing, bright, burning. "Get out!" he rasped. "All of you, now!" The council members scrambled for the door. Selene didn't move. "Selene?" His voice was strained, barely human. "Go!" "No. I can't control it." "Then don't." She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. "Stop trying to fight it alone. Let me help." Kadrin's breathing was ragged, his entire body shaking. "I don't know how." "Yes, you do." Her voice was firm. "You've been doing it for weeks. Every time I play, every time I'm near you, you let me in. So do it now." His hands came up, gripping her wrists. "It's not enough. It's never enough. Then we'll find something that is." Kadrin stared at her, his expression raw and desperate. And then, slowly, he closed his eyes. Selene felt the bond flare between them, stronger than it had ever been. She could feel his pain, his fear, the rage clawing at the edges of his mind. But underneath it all, she felt something else. Something the curse couldn't touch. Him. The man he was beneath the madness. The man who'd walked into a ballroom and chosen her. The man who'd fought for her, risked everything for her, refused to let her go even when it would have been easier. And she realized something. The curse wasn't just about rage. It was about isolation, about being so alone, so cut off from everything that made you human that there was nothing left to hold on to. But Kadrin wasn't alone anymore. She was here, and she wasn't letting go. Selene pressed her forehead to his, her hands cupping his face. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm right here, and I'm not leaving." Kadrin's breathing hitched, and slowly, agonizingly slowly, the glow began to fade. His hands loosened on her wrists, his shoulders sagging as the tension bled out of him. When he finally opened his eyes again, they were dark. Human. He stared at her, his expression stunned. "How?" "I don't know." Selene's voice shook. "But it worked." Kadrin pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I thought I was going to lose it," he said hoarsely. "I thought this time—" "But you didn't." She pulled back just enough to look at him. "And you won't. Not as long as I'm here." Kadrin's hand came up, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "You can't promise that." "Yes, I can." Her voice was certain. "Because I'm not going anywhere." He kissed her then, hard, desperate, like she was the only thing keeping him grounded. And maybe she was. That night, Selene couldn't sleep. She lay in Kadrin's bed, his arm wrapped around her waist, his breathing slow and even. But her mind was racing. The curse had retreated, but it hadn't disappeared. And she didn't know how much longer they could keep fighting it like this. There had to be another way. She slipped out of bed carefully, trying not to wake him, and crossed to the window. The mountains stretched out before her, dark and silent under the moonlight. Somewhere out there had to be answers. The curse had a source, a beginning. And if it had a beginning, it had to have an end. She just had to find it. The next morning, Selene went to the fortress library. It was a massive, dusty place tucked into the northern wing, filled with books and scrolls that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. She spent hours combing through them, searching for anything related to the curse. Most of the records were vague, references to the madness or the affliction, but nothing concrete, until she found a journal. It was buried at the bottom of a stack of old ledgers, its cover cracked and faded. The handwriting inside was shaky, uneven, like it had been written by someone barely holding on. Selene's breath caught as she read the first entry. The curse is not what they think it is. It is not a punishment. It is a severing, a breaking of the bond that ties us to the land, to the pack, to each other. My father felt it first. He said it was like drowning in rage, with no anchor to pull him back. And I feel it now, too. Every day I feel it more. She flipped through the pages, her pulse quickening. There is a way to stop it. The old texts speak of it. But it requires something no king has been willing to give. Complete surrender. Not to the curse, to the bond, to another. Selene's hands trembled. The curse feeds on isolation, on the belief that we must carry this burden alone. But the bond, The true bond, formed in choice and trust, can break it. I know this. I feel it. But I am too far gone, and there is no one left to save me. The entry ended there. Selene sat back, her mind racing. Complete surrender. That was the answer. Not fighting the curse, not trying to control it, letting go, trusting someone else to hold you when you couldn't hold yourself. She stood abruptly, the journal clutched in her hands, and ran. Kadrin was in the training yard when she found him, sparring with one of the guards. He looked up as she approached, his expression shifting to concern. Selene, what's wrong? She crossed to him, breathless. I found something in the library, a journal. He frowned. What kind of journal? One written by your great-grandfather, about the curse. She held it out to him. Kadrin, I think I know how to break it. He took the journal, his expression wary. What are you talking about? The curse isn't just about rage. It's about isolation, about being cut off from everything that makes you human. Her voice was urgent. But the bond can break it. Not just ease it. Break it. Completely. Kadrin stared at her. How? By letting go. By trusting me to hold you when you can't hold yourself. She grabbed his hands. You've been fighting this alone for so long, but you don't have to anymore. If you let me in, really let me in, the bond can do what the curse can't. It can heal you. Kadrin's jaw tightened. Selene, that's not... It is. Her voice shook. I know it sounds impossible, but I felt it the other day, when you almost lost control. The bond pushed the curse back, and it wasn't just because I was there. It was because you let me in. He shook his head. What if it doesn't work? What if I lose control anyway? Then I'll pull you back, just like I did before. And if you can't, then we'll deal with it together. Her hands tightened on his. But I'm not letting you face this alone. Not anymore. Kadrin stared at her for a long moment, his expression torn. Then, finally, he nodded. All right, we try it. They chose the night of the full moon. According to the journal, the curse was strongest then, when the bond between Alpha and Wolf was most volatile. If the bond could hold through that, it could hold through anything. Selene stood in Kadrin's chambers, her heart pounding as the sun set beyond the mountains. Kadrin was already tense, his hands clenched into fists, his breathing uneven. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. Yes, I do. Selene, I'm not afraid of you. She crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. I've never been afraid of you, and I'm not starting now. Kadrin's jaw worked. If this goes wrong, it won't. You don't know that. No, but I believe it. She pressed her forehead to his. And that's enough. The moon rose, and Kadrin's eyes began to glow. Selene felt it immediately, the surge of rage, sharp and vicious, clawing at the edges of his mind. But this time she didn't pull away. She held on. The bond flared between them, bright and burning, and Selene poured everything she had into it. Every ounce of trust, every moment of connection, every reason she'd chosen him. Kadrin's hands tightened on hers, his breathing ragged. I can't... Yes, you can. Her voice was steady. I'm here. I've got you. The curse pushed back harder this time, but Selene didn't let go. And slowly, agonizingly slowly, the glow began to fade. Kadrin's breathing evened out. His hands loosened. And when he finally opened his eyes, they were clear. Completely clear. For the first time in 3 years, there was no amber, no flicker of madness, just him. Kadrin stared at her, his expression stunned. It's gone. Selene's breath caught. What? The curse. It's... He broke off, shaking his head. I can't feel it at all. Her eyes burned. Are you sure? Yes. His hands came up, cupping her face. Selene, it's gone. You broke it. She let out a shaky laugh, tears streaming down her face. We broke it. Kadrin pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she thought her ribs might crack. And for the first time in years, he felt whole. The news spread through the kingdom like wildfire. The curse was broken. The Alpha King had survived. And it was because of her. The council called an emergency session, but this time their expressions weren't hostile. They were awed. This changes everything, Counselor Marin said quietly. If the bond can break the curse, then it was never just about rage, Kadrin finished. It was about connection, about refusing to let someone carry the burden alone. Marin nodded slowly. Then perhaps we've been approaching this wrong for generations. Perhaps. She looked at Selene. You've done something no one else could, Miss Ardis. You've given this kingdom hope. Selene's chest tightened. I didn't do it for the kingdom. No, but the kingdom will benefit anyway. 3 months later, Kadrin and Selene stood before the entire court, not as king and subject, as king and queen. The ceremony was simple. No extravagant decorations, no excessive formality, just the two of them, standing in front of the people who doubted them and proving them wrong. When Kadrin slipped the crown onto her head, Selene felt the weight of it, not just the medal, but the responsibility. But she didn't falter, because she wasn't carrying it alone. Kadrin took her hand, his grip steady, and turned to face the court. This woman saved my life, he said quietly. Not because she was stronger than the curse, but because she refused to let me face it alone. And that's what I ask of all of you. Not strength, not perfection, just the courage to stand together when it matters most. The hall erupted in applause. And for the first time in her life, Selene felt like she belonged. That night, they stood on the balcony overlooking the valley, the stars stretching out above them like a promise. Kadrin's arm was wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on the top of her head. Do you ever regret it? He asked quietly. Regret what? Choosing me. Selene turned to face him, her hands coming up to cup his face. Not for a second. His expression softened. Even after everything? Especially after everything. She smiled. You gave me something I didn't even know I wanted. A life that's mine, a choice that matters. Kadrin kissed her, slow and gentle, like they had all the time in the world. And when he pulled back, his eyes were clear and bright and full of something she'd never seen before. Hope. I love you, he said quietly. Selene's breath caught. I love you too. And as the stars burned above them, the curse that had haunted his bloodline for generations faded into nothing more than a memory. Because in the end, it wasn't strength that saved him. It was connection. It was trust. It was her. And that was enough.